welcome to our Into the Newsroom session, and this is geared towards interns and early in career journalists. And we're delighted to have Chris Harvey from the University of Maryland with us, and Tom Linthicum, our MDDC Foundation Board President, as well as all of our fresh, enthusiastic journalistic faces. So I will turn it over to Tom so he can officially welcome you on behalf of the board.
Thanks very much, Rebecca, and good morning, everybody. Welcome. So great to have you with us. So great to see some of you again, because I haven't had a chance to see you either virtually or in person for several months now. So thanks for being here. Really appreciate your giving the time to do this, and we think we're going to have an excellent program for you, not only today, but other training that will continue throughout the summer, which Rebecca and I are working to set up. This is what the MDDC Press Foundation does, and we're very dedicated to that task, and we're proud of the contribution that we're able to make in getting guidance and training for the next generation of journalists who are going to help carry this profession into the future. So thanks for all being here. Let me ask you to introduce yourselves. I've only got about 3 of you on my screen at the moment, but if you would just quickly say your name and where you are in college, and or where you went to college, if you're still in college, and where you're working this summer. Anjali, we'll start with you.
Good morning. Thanks for having all of us here. I'm Anjali. I'm a rising senior at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and I will be at the Baltimore Sun as the editorial intern.
Great, thanks. Who's next here? Lindsay?
Hi, I'm Lindsay, and I'm a rising senior at Macalester College, and I'm going to be a reporting intern with the Wilmington News Journal in Wilmington, Delaware.
Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Jack, I don't see your picture on my screen, but I know you're out there.
Yeah, I'm here. So yeah, I'm Jack. I'm a rising senior at the University of Maryland in College Park, and I'll be writing for the Annapolis Capital. Excellent.
Welcome, sir. Props for the tie.
Thank you.
Ellie, you're out there too, right?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellie Heffernan. I'm a rising junior at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and I'm interning at the Daily Record in Baltimore City.
Okay, welcome. Now, who else? We had Ricardo. Is that right?
Yes. My name is Ricardo Ortiz. I was a journalist in Mexico. I was writing about politics and the president, and now I am working of Casa of Maryland, the organization to work with the immigrant people, and I have some friends in the Baltimore Sun who try to support me for, when I learning more English, I can write in the Baltimore Sun.
Fantastic. That's great. I doubt if you'll have anyone quite as controversial to write about as the current president of Mexico, but we'll do our best to come up with some interesting people for you.
Yeah, it's a difficult time now in Mexico, but I am so happy to be part of the new journalist. So thank you so much for having me here.
Welcome. Thank you. Now, did someone else just join us that I see?
Yes, we have a couple more people who've just joined us, and for those who have just come on board, we're asking you who you are, where you went to school, or where you're in school if you're still in school, and where you're working now. And so we haven't heard from Colleen Neely. Colleen, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, again, I'm Colleen. I'm a rising junior at University of Maryland, College Park. And actually 4 years ago, I took a class by Chris Harvey, Terp Young Scholars. So that was fun. I was in high school. And this summer, I'm working at the Baltimore Business Journal.
Great.
Wonderful. Welcome.
And Caitlin, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Caitlin Capelli. I'm a rising junior at the University of Maryland, College Park. And this summer I'm interning at the Cape Gazette.
Great. So I'm so glad you have the beach vibe. That's wonderful. And Jaya, or I'm sure I mispronounced your name. Could you, Jaya Montague?
Hi, my video camera actually doesn't work, but my name is Jaya Montague. I actually live in Philly. I was recommended to this by Diana Sugg at the Baltimore Sun. I graduated Temple in journalism in 2018. And I'm currently a freelancer, and I also do marketing for a nonprofit in Philly.
Terrific. Welcome, Jaya.
All right.
And
So
then
that's all.
Madison? Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, Madison. We have Madison. Okay.
Madison, we
are you
can't quite
there?
hear you.
Audio maybe.
Well, why don't we go to Tatiana, and then we can pick up with Madison maybe when her audio works.
Hi everyone, my name is Tatiana Turner. I recently graduated from the Columbia School of Journalism, and I am currently a reporter at the Baltimore Sun, and this was recommended to me also by Diana Sugg.
Great. Terrific, thanks.
We'll give Madison one more try and then we'll roll. Madison, are you there? Okay, well, technical difficulties, but Madison, we hope you can at least hear us, and maybe we can get your audio back during the presentation. I'm going to move us on into the presentation because it's this disjointed beginning has slowed us down just a little bit, and we don't want to take any more time from Chris Harvey. Let me just introduce Chris to you. Very simply, she's an excellent journalist at places like the Washington Post. She's an excellent teacher. She's an excellent mentor, and she's a great friend and colleague of many years, and we're delighted to have her here today. So Chris, thanks very much, and take it away.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Tom. It's nice to see a few familiar faces, and hopefully everything will go smoothly technologically today. It seems like we've had a few little bumps with audio, but I hope that that doesn't disrupt what we're doing. I was asked to come in and talk a little bit about just helping you find your way as a reporter in your newsrooms, especially this summer when you won't likely have a lot of access to in-person reporting. And in that kind of scenario, being very proficient online, being able to do research becomes more important. So I've got a couple of PowerPoints. We'll try making them full screen. If it becomes problematic, we'll go a little smaller. I want to make it interactive, so if you want to jump in at any point, feel free to jump in. Probably at different points I'll have you look for things that I'm trying to show you as well, so I'll stop sharing the full screen. And I've got a couple of PowerPoints, and if we need a 5-minute break or a 2-minute break to stretch your legs in between, we might even think about that. We'll see how everybody's doing as we move along. So let me pull up, I'm going to go ahead and first I'm going to pull up I'm going to come down and share my screen. All right. Are you starting to see something that says MDDC workshop on it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and make this full screen too, and we'll see how that rolls. Okay. So all of you, it sounds like one or two of you may have already started in your newsrooms and the rest of you are about to be starting. And so really, as much as you can do ahead of time to start familiarizing yourself, not only with the newsroom, but also with the people in the newsroom and what your newsroom's goals are, is really important. So for instance, have you had time to look through or talk to some of the editors or marketing folks at the paper to see really what do they consider their audience to be? You know, online may be different than print. So often print would skew a little older, have a different kind of reach than the online version. Knowing a little bit about what they find important, who their audience is, could help you to think about, you know, what you want to cover when you get there. So it sounds pretty basic, but I think it's an important step to think about what's the goal of your publication and who are they trying to reach. It'll help you then to think about your own particular beat. If you haven't done it yet, I strongly urge you to read back a couple of months of some of the key stories your publication's been doing. So there's been a lot of big national stories that the local papers have been covering heavily as well. Obviously, Black Lives Matter, that movement, police violence, police community interactions is a big one. Read back a couple of months, see what your publication's done with that, because it might prompt you to think they didn't do X, they should be doing Y. Why aren't they doing it, right? You might have suggestions based on what you see in their coverage. The same, obviously, for COVID-19. Huge national story, huge story in Maryland. If you're in Prince George's County, we have the highest infection rate in the state and the second highest deaths. It's important to know that and to see what kind of coverage your publications have been doing. You know, are they talking about the hospitals? I know in the case of PG, at some point earlier this spring, they had to send very ill people to other jurisdictions because our ICUs were overloaded. They had to fill up an ice rink in Laurel with bodies because there was nowhere to put them. So read back and see what they've done and what you might do that hasn't been done. How many businesses are declaring bankruptcy because they've had to close? You know, what are people doing for recreation? How are families doing? I know I talked a little while ago to a reporter at the Washington Post, and he was saying the police are expecting a lot more cases of domestic violence because families are trapped at home together. So asking yourself questions about the existing coverage and how you might fill in places that haven't been covered are important. The same, you've probably seen some stories already about how well or how not so well the school systems did with trying to teach kids at home, right? There are a lot of communities, a lot of pockets of places that might not have good internet access. There are a lot of homes that might not have computers. How are those kids doing? How are the school systems going to make up for that? So read back, read not only your publication, but also see who are the direct competitors of your publication, how are they handling some of these stories, and what might you pitch to your editors that could fill in some of the gaps. I strongly urge you to think about a spreadsheet. When you're reading through these stories as a journalist and not just somebody who has some interest in news, start a spreadsheet and start tracking names of people that pop up a lot as sources. Put their title down, find their Twitter handle, see if you can find them online with email contacts or cell contacts. You're starting a list for your beat. This is going to be important because you're probably not going to be making rounds on your beat as you would have done if we weren't in COVID-19 pandemics. So from those lists, you can start making calls to people, introducing yourself by phone or through email. It's a good way to track people and build your source list virtually. Drive around if you can, guys. If you're staying, I know a lot of you are probably reporting virtually, but if you have a chance to drive to the community that you're going to be covering, take a drive around and look around. What are you seeing? You know, what's striking you about the community? Are there a lot of boarded up businesses? Are people walking around at all? If they're out, are they wearing masks? is there construction going on, or are there big equipment standing there doing nothing? Is it at a standstill? Jot down things. This is what you would normally do if you were there in person. Take some time to at least do a drive around and write little questions down on things that you see, because it might lead to story threads. Probably you've all got a social media presence. I'm hoping you do. Have you started using Twitter for reporting yet? I'm hoping you have with that as well. Before you get to your beat, if you know what you're going to be covering, start following influencers on Twitter, right? Police and fire contacts. Start searching, doing hashtag searches for topics that you're interested in, and start looking to see who are some of these movers and shakers. Start following them. Start seeing the conversations that they're prompting on their threads, because I know in our news bureaus, we increasingly find that following these threads on Twitter leads to stories and also to new sources. We've had students even post questions, post queries with hashtags on Twitter. How are you doing in lockdown? What's happening in your family? And then having people who might want to talk to you direct message you rather than put a post out to the world, so that other reporters don't grab your story before you can get to it. But it's a really good way to sort of post queries and also see what influencers are doing that might affect what you want to cover on your beat. So the more you can find out about your county or city and its residents before you hit the ground there, the better. And that's just a little picture of the Baltimore Harbor that I took last summer. There are some really good links, some government sites that you should be aware of, because they can really help you to background stories. They might not be the whole story, but they might end up being the bottom of a story, or something that you can do for background when you need to buttress what you're saying at the top of your story. So for instance, the Census Bureau has fantastic demographic information, usually updates or estimates within the last year or two. And I went ahead and, let me just click here. I looked for some data to compare Baltimore, which I know some of you are going to be at the Sun this summer, comparing data for Baltimore with data for the state and the country. And even just looking through some of this background, this is in a section of the site called Quick Facts, so you can search different ways by jurisdiction through Quick Facts on the census site. But you start to see some interesting information just from comparisons of cities and states and country. So let me see if I can actually carefully scroll through here without closing anything, and show you a couple of things. So if you look here at the top section on people, and you're looking in the first column on Baltimore, they give you data from 2010 and then 2019 here. What strikes you in the comparison of population data for Baltimore from 2010 and 19 versus Maryland and the US? Anybody notice something interesting here? You can chime in. So the left column is Baltimore.
Yeah, it's less people is here.
Is that you, Carlos?
Yes.
Say that again.
It's less people than 2010
Yeah.
in Baltimore City.
Yep, and it's the opposite of the trends in the state and the US, right?
Exactly, yes.
So that is, right off the bat, something just interesting to note as you're thinking about things that the cities lost. It was almost 621,000 in 2010, and now they're down to 593,000. So they've lost people, whereas in Maryland, the population's going up, and in the US, the population's gone up. A couple of other things. What if we come down to where it's got race and origin, what do you see distinct about Baltimore versus Maryland and the US here? Anything jump out at you? So we're in this area along in here. How does how do the demographics for Baltimore compare to Maryland?
It's more Black or African American people than
Yeah.
another.
by a lot, right? So
Yeah.
in Baltimore, the population almost 63% African American, versus in Maryland about 31%, in the US about 13%. So that's, again, if you're going to be working in Baltimore, something significant to know, because some of the things that have been happening recently are very much, there's some stark differences based on race, right? The police violence, the rallies, very different differences there on race, as have the COVID numbers. When you look at who's been infected and who's been dying, there are big differences by race. So it's good to know what your population is for your jurisdiction. And obviously you could have searched for Annapolis or other cities here as well. They give some pretty interesting other kinds of data. Let me see, I made some notes here before you guys came in. They had listings here on foreign-born. Let's see if I can find that section. Here we go. Foreign-born, and you'll see fewer foreign-born in Baltimore than in Maryland or the US, which is interesting. Maryland has a fairly high percentage, 15% foreign-born. What about, let's scroll down and look at computer use, and why now might computer use be important and access to computers?
Well, all of the schools have moved to virtual learning. So if there's a higher percentage of people with computer access, then those people are going to have an advantage at this time.
Absolutely. And not so students for one, but also a lot of us have been lucky enough to work from home, and obviously having both computer and internet access is critical to that. So all these kids late March all around the state were sent home to do, virtual learning. And yet in Baltimore, you see 84% of the households don't have computer access, and or only 84% have it, and only 72% have internet access. That puts a kink in learning virtually, doesn't it? So I know the school systems attempted to hand out computers in a lot of jurisdictions and to give little hotspot internet access help. But the stories that we saw coming out about this were a lot of kids weren't logging in, significant percentages, and are going to be behind because of this. So that's, right now they're trying to decide what to do for fall, and this kind of data would be important to those decisions, because if you can't access what they're trying to teach you, it's going to be problematic. So scrolling through some other things that were interesting, if you come all the way down, there was a section on income and poverty, and percentages of people living basically in the poverty, under the poverty line, and almost 22% in Baltimore are living in poverty. And that's a really high number, and it's something to know if you're covering that jurisdiction for your summer job. Much higher. The Maryland percentage was 9%, and the state was about 12%. Okay, so at the end of this session, I will give you a PDF of these PowerPoints, so you'll be able to go back in through some of these links, and you can explore your own jurisdictions, and maybe we'll even have some time today to do some of that before you hit your next session. But so census data, wealth of information that can enrich a lot of different kinds of stories. I don't know, have any of you heard of the Maryland Manual Online at all? If you've covered the State House or state government or even the court system, you may have. It's put out by the Maryland State Archives. It's got a lot of information all in one place. And so we often say check there first. Sorry, my mouse is freezing a little bit. Some of the data, some of the information, contacts, phone numbers, names that are in there, you can find information on all the members. There are 188 members of the state legislature, right? We've got senators and delegate members from every county in Baltimore in the legislature. So if you click on a link, you can easily access, who's the Senate president. Both the speaker and the president are very much new in the legislature. The speaker died and the Senate president's very ill, so they were replaced within the last year. So you could click on these links and get contact info, who their chief of staff is, who their press secretaries are. And then there are lots of links here to committees, and there would be agency listings, committee listings to tell you who to reach for various stories. And you know, if you want to cover something in the environment, what committee would cover that? You can click through these to find that information out. They list all the standing committees with contact information. So sometimes it may not be your primary beat, but if you're covering the environment, you might want to talk to folks who might be proposing new bills in the next year. And so just be aware that this information is easily accessible here. In addition to that, court information, US senators, a lot of times folks aren't quite clear even who their members, their representatives are in Congress or in the US Senate, so you can click in here and find that out. How many congressmen are there in Maryland? Anybody know? We've got 8 of them, and only 1 is a Republican. And Andrew Harris from the 1st Congressional District, which a lot of that's taken up on the eastern shore and parts of Anne Arundel County. The rest of our congressmen are Democrats. That's important to know where the power lies in the state. Both of our US senators are Democrats, and so you can find ways to contact them through these listings. So there's a wealth of state information in here. If you're going into a place and it's in Maryland and you don't even know who the representatives are, there's a handy little link here. Oops, it's going a little berserko. You can literally type in your address. I'll put mine in and I'll show you what will pop up. You could put in the address of your publication if you wanted to see the heart of your district. This is me. It'll tell you who all your elected officials at the state level are. So your congressman, your US senator, your state senator, and your state delegates. So that's sometimes really useful if you're kind of running blind and you're not sure who to contact. So Maryland Manual can be very useful. We're in election cycle, right? It's a presidential election year. It's good for you to have a sense of who lives in the state and how they vote. So anybody know, does Maryland tend to go more Democratic or more Republican in its votes? Anybody know off the top of their head?
Democratic, I believe.
Yeah. Sorry, my little mouse is going a little wonky here. Yeah. So you can go, the official site's called the Maryland State Board of Elections. You can click in here to find a whole wealth of information about not only registering to vote, deadlines for voting, who's running, how the state's gone in various elections, who won what. And I actually put a link here. It also tells you how the voter registration is running in Maryland as of May. Like you can do month by month looks to see who's running ahead. And I'm just going to scroll down here because they've got the new registration and the totals. Whoops, go all the way down. So the active registration in Maryland is the boxes that we're looking through now. And so I'm going to look here, the Democrat and Republican, there are some smaller parties that are recognized. But just to see the total registered, so that this box here, the 2 million represents the registered Democrats as of May, and the 1 million is the registered Republicans. So it's about, the registration in the state is about 2-to-1 Democratic leaning. And so often in Maryland, the Democratic candidates win. That's good for you to know when you're writing political stories. So the election site can be really helpful with very distinct data. A lot of times too, you might be profiling candidates for office and you need to have background on how they did, if they're an incumbent, how did they do the last time, right? Or how did they do in the primary? So I found the link on that election site to the primary returns. And we can look and see, obviously Trump and Biden were the 2 winners in the primary, but what I wanted to see was how many votes did each get in their respective primaries. So if you scroll down here, so Trump attracted about 294,000 votes, right, in the primary that was just held in June. And Biden attracted closer to 900,000 votes. That might be helpful in trying to figure out how the general election is going to go. You can see how many votes they attracted in the primary. Still a lot of time between then and now, but there are probably very few pundits who would predict a Trump win in Maryland, right, in the primary based on voter registration and the votes in the primary. So if you were going to do stories heading into the general election, you could refer to some data. They've got the numbers not only for the presidential race, but also for how the races for Congress, there were elections for delegates to the national conventions. A lot of different data can come out of that. So very useful. You also, if you're doing prediction stories for the general election, you might want to see how the last one in 2016 went. And probably a lot of you have memories of that, because what were the predictions heading in even the morning of the 2016 November elections? Who was being predicted as the winner based on polling?
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, and obviously, I was in our Capitol News Service multimedia newsroom that evening. I brought my daughter over to see. I thought it was going to be a historic win for a woman, so we had some high schoolers in with us watching the returns coming in. And right around 9 o'clock, what did you see start to happen? We were watching the returns. It started coming in around 8. We started seeing shifts, right? 9, 10, 11. States that were considered pivotal to a Hillary win started coming in for Trump. And so, yeah, that information, might be important if you're doing background and what might be called B matter for stories about the next election. So you can go in and find out all the tallies for 2016. You can see on the left here, they've got it going way back, both for Baltimore City and the state. You can see what the returns were for individual races. And often that's important to the bottom of profile stories or election stories heading into the new cycle. So the elections board info is valuable. Do be aware too that the counties all have their own election boards, and you can access more local races, not non-statewide races, through the county boards of elections too. COVID, probably a high likelihood that at some point in the summer you'll be writing something about the pandemic and the virus. Have any of you seen this State Department of Health site? Because they have running tallies every day. I will admit I go to it every day. I'm that paranoid. But they have a wonderful breakout and really good maps and charts on this site, breaking out incidences and deaths by county. And so you'll see here at the top, PG leads the state in the number of infections in the county by a lot. Montgomery County is the second highest incidences, followed by Baltimore County and then Baltimore City. And it drops way down when you start getting, sorry, it's not scrolling. When you get down into Western Maryland and the shore, the numbers go way down. Look how low Allegheny County, Queen Anne's are to the 17,000 plus that we saw in PG. So they've got a map of incidences. This shows the drop off, the percentage positive as a percentage of the total tested. And that was one of the figures that Larry Hogan was citing. You know, they were looking to see this drop off before they started opening the businesses back up. You can see over here the hospitalizations, and that's definitely dropped off since March by a significant amount, or since April. It's dropped off significantly. I always look to see the ICU beds because we've heard so much about sort of in the middle of the cycle, some counties not being able to handle the numbers that were coming in, and that's leveled off. There was a little bump here, looks like about a week ago. What do you think this little bump might have prompted that? What's been happening over the last couple of weeks nationally, especially in this Washington metro area?
Protesting.
Yeah, so there have been some protests, a lot of protests, and there's also been some opening of businesses. And so some of those things, when you talk to official sources, they might say those might be contributing factors. You can also check by age distribution. And I know early on, a lot of folks were talking about, it was the older people who were affected. But when you look at the age distribution, there have been a lot of what I'd consider younger people in their 20s and 30s who've been infected. But the difference here is what? The green represents deaths, and the blue is the number of cases. And so what's sort of the distinctions that you see here, guys?
The death rate is higher as age increases. So the death rate in people over the age of 80 is higher than with teenagers or younger people.
Yeah, it's stark when you look at it because there are more cases for the younger adults when I consider in their 30s, right? More cases for those numbers, but almost no deaths until you hit into, there's still a pretty small amount here in the 40 to 49 age group, only 87 in the whole cycle. But each decade, it really starts to jump, and by the time you get to the 80 plus, that's got the highest number of confirmed deaths. So the breakouts here are really interesting, and the other one that's been, there have been some stories written already, what's happening with the racial distribution of both cases and deaths.
Well, it's disproportionately affecting Black people and non-white people.
Yeah, so you can see the high number of cases here, 18,000 cases for African American, more cases than for white. And if you remember from our demographics on the census, the state has a lot more white people than African American, so it's just very disproportionate, especially for both Latino and African. Actually, the case numbers here for Hispanic or Latino are high as well. The deaths aren't as high as African American, so that's interesting as well. So just by looking at the data, sometimes you might end up with a list of questions. And I strongly urge you looking at some of the state data. I'm sure every single state has a version of this, and looking each day to see what's being reported and what stories might that lead to. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, which is based in Atlanta, has running data every day for the US. So that's good to know. I'm also going to pause here for 1 second and ask you to look at the proper names for the CDC and Hopkins. Why am I doing that? If you've gone to Maryland, we give Fs. We give Fs for every misspelled proper name. And I can't tell you the number of stories I had in the spring from some of my grad students for these two proper names. What's the trip up points here, guys? Be aware of this summer because you might be writing these stories. What's tricky about CDC?
The S at the end of centers.
Yeah, plural. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And what about Hopkins?
The extra F.
What?
The S in John.
Johns Hopkins. And yeah, both of those, be really careful when you're writing those proper names because it's easy to mess them up. So just real quick, let's look at the national data here from the CDC. We've crossed the 2 million mark for infections in the US and 116,000 deaths. So I was hearing yesterday on the news they're predicting, well, I won't, really high by the fall. So be careful out there, guys. But you can go to the CDC to get the latest information nationally as well as information on testing and, excuse me, what to do if you get sick too. Hopkins is a really good research medical facility, and I pulled this up because they're doing a lot of research with COVID. And I don't know how much each of these bullet points have already been reported, but if you're working in Baltimore, some of these might be worth checking out, some of the stuff that they're doing testing. I was looking through this yesterday too, and there was, I think this was the site that had some interesting information on its impact not only on your heart and lungs, but on your brain and cognitive abilities. Obesity, this was kind of shocking. They weren't having as many cases with younger people getting getting ill in Italy and China, and when it came here to the US, there was a much higher percentage, and some of that's attributable to the higher rates of obesity in the US. So that's worth pursuing as far as bigger stories. And mental illness, apparently there's been some research done that links, that had linked some mental illnesses like schizophrenia having been caused by other viruses, and they're saying they're worried now. Something they're going to look into is seeing if these viruses might prompt more illness like schizophrenia. So some valuable research is being done at Hopkins right in the heart of Baltimore, and you might want to consult some of these links. So those were just some, I thought of some of the bigger topics that you might be covering this summer. And so I was trying to find some government data that would be valuable to some background for your stories. But obviously when you're reporting, a lot of times it's not just about, okay, I'm going to go to this site. Often it's, sorry, I'm trying to get up to stop sharing and my mouse is stuck. Okay. Often it's not, I'm going to go to the census site. It's, I'm going to do some searches and find some of my own information, right? So I wanted to spend some time on smart searches beyond just having a little list of sites that might be useful to you. I'm going to go ahead and pull up another PowerPoint. Why don't we take a 2-minute break for you to stand up if you want to get a drink, do that, and I'll go ahead and pull my PowerPoint up while you're stretching your legs and getting a glass of water if you want it. So give me just a sec. Does anybody want to jump in? I've been talking a lot. Any thoughts on any of those sites or other sites on some of these bigger topics that you think might be valuable?
Christine, as people are getting up and stretching, we did have Elizabeth Shue, I believe is how you pronounce her last name, join us. So Elizabeth, if you aren't walking around and stretching, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Elizabeth, and I'm started working with Maryland Matters this June, covering environment and education.
And what school do you go to, Elizabeth?
I just graduated from Princeton this June.
Terrific. Well, thanks for coming into this session.
And while you guys are all sort of taking in all the information as well, I did want to bring up that MDDC is hosting our Into the Newsroom series. This is the kickoff session, but we'll have topical 45-minute capsule programs every other Wednesday throughout the rest of the summer. So you'll be, because you signed up for this, you're on our email list and you'll be getting communications about that. And then we also have a program next Wednesday about trauma awareness, reporting on traumatic events, staying safe during traumatic events. It's becoming increasingly, we're all realizing that journalists are called to oftentimes the worst day of people's lives. And that does have, you sort of have contact effects of that. And there's also some specialization that comes about when you're reporting on and using sources that are affected by trauma. So I hope you all will join us for that as well. And back to you, Chris.
Okay. Looks like we have people coming back to their seats. So I'm going to head into this next session about power searching. And feel free to jump in with thoughts or questions as we move through some of this too. I'm going to try this a little differently and have easier access to my browser so I won't show the slideshow full screen. I'll show it almost full screen so I can get back and forth easily. But I want to just talk about your searching and how you find information. I want to grab, actually, let me go ahead. I'm going to try it full screen and see how we go. Okay. So I want you to take a look at this site. It was a study done about how cats react to men with beards. And let me just show you some of the information from the study. So they showed several cats, pictures of clean-shaven men, and then pictures, 5 photos of men with beards. And they wanted to see how the cats would react. And they said in the methodology, they say they showed them one at a time, 20 seconds, and recorded how the cats reacted to these photos. So you'll see some of the reactions here. Some cats didn't have any reaction. Their respiration went way up. Their eyes dilated. Some runkles, 23%. Some of the cats started to shed. Some of their behaviors when they were looking at the photos included hissing, spitting, getting agitated. Sometimes cats either licked or attacked the photos. So lots of pretty visible reactions. The researchers started to interpret it. Sometimes they, often didn't seem to like the men with beards. They were confused by the beards. What are you thinking about this study so far, guys, as I'm scrolling through some of the information that was collected?
I'm wondering why they did this. Like, I'm wondering what the purpose was.
Yeah, that's a good question. And then we'll look through some of the notes here in the bibliography. What are your thoughts now? Can you see the bibliography? They list as sources Madonna Ciccone, Sinead O'Connor, A. Schwarzenegger. Any problems with the sources? Maybe these names are too old for you to be familiar with.
Dr. Seuss. I mean, clearly it's like play. It's like not a real source.
Yeah. So, and if you got to the very bottom, and if I had allowed you to see even the URL, it would have clued you in, because this is posted on a site called Improbable Research. But when it was initially posted, I came across it. One of my colleagues at Columbia had put it up to make reporters wary of what they find on the internet. And I like to start with this because you have to be really skeptical of what you see on the internet, because lots of people think it's very funny to put up not only misinformation, but intentional hoax information. So I want you to start thinking about how you can, be really careful when you're doing research for stories. Oftentimes what we do is we look to see who the publisher is, who's put this site up. And usually at the top of a page of a prominent news site, you'll see about or contact information up near the top navigation bar, right? But let's say you're looking at a site and you don't see an about link or a contact link, and it's not clear from the URL who's posted the site up. You can actually do searches on these whois lookups. They're basically where you would register your news site on the internet. And they'll tell you a little bit about who the source of the site is and how to reach them. So I'm going to just type in one that I know the answer to already, because having worked here. But so this is the registrar information for the Washington Post. And if you scroll down here, you see a lot of sort of interesting information about when it was updated, how long the site's going to be good for, when they have to re-up and pay more money. I'm going to scroll down. You've got a zip code, you've got phone number and fax numbers, email addresses. So right off the bat, if you were worried about who put this site up and what their purpose was, you can do a whois lookup and find out some contact info about that site. So I think that if you have any questions about the validity of a site, this might be a good way to do some backgrounding on it. What about, so the URL, and the URL specifically before the first single slash tells you quite a bit about the source of the information as well. So for instance here, guys, what does a .gov in the URL signify?
Government website?
Yeah, and specifically, if it's got a .gov, it's managed by the General Services Administration. It's a U.S. It's from the U.S. So it's either a federal site. Now some state sites have the .gov, but specifically, you know, the source of it is a government agency in the U.S. It's not a person. It's not a company. So I'm not saying everything that's published by the government is accurate, but you would know that it's not a hoax. It's coming from whatever agency it's purporting to be, right? What about .mil? If you see that in the URL, who's responsible for those sites?
Military.
Yeah, and so .mil is specifically U.S. military sites managed by the Department of Defense. So you know that it would be like getting a press release or talking to a press person for those agencies if you see a .mil. What about .edu? You see that in the domain. It's primarily colleges and universities in the U.S., but there are some other educational institutions that have the .edu as well. So if it's coming from a department in one of those universities or colleges, probably a pretty high level of veracity. But do be aware that usually colleges and universities allow posting by, certainly by professors, by TAs, by students even. So if I'm posting something to my .edu site at Maryland, if I'm writing about journalism, I probably have a pretty high level of accuracy attached to my information. But let's say I'm going to use my site to post information about wire-haired fox terriers, which I love. I have one. You might get some opinions that are valid from me, but certainly not very factual. I'm not a vet. I'm not an animal person. So do look to see if they're actually posting about what they have some scholarship on and not something that they're just ranting about, right? And that goes for anything you see online. People like to rant, and it's often not in their areas of expertise. Who can post to .org? So it was initially intended by Congress to be used for nonprofits, but the reality is that .orgs as well as .coms and .nets, anybody can buy those sites. So if you've taken a class at your university where they had you post your resume and your clips or other information, I know we do that too at UMD. You went online and you bought a site, and we could have, at one point I did have a .com. I think you can buy a .com, .net, .org even as an individual. So it doesn't really tell you much about the originator if you see that ending. The .int is intended for, it's sort of countries that are working together on programs. So that's not something that you commonly see, but that was considered a top-level domain when it was brought into being a couple of decades ago. So obviously you're going to look and see what the URL tells you about the site, but also to see, has it been updated recently? You know, news sites are updated multiple times a day. Some sites, some government sites, you might see the last update 6 months ago, a year ago. So depending on what the information is, the info may be too old or still valid. So if you're looking at FBI crime data and the most recent they have is a year ago, that's okay. It's probably the most recent that they've collected from the organizations, the police organizations around the country. But if you're looking for COVID information, you're going to want to see that you've got something from the last week or the last day, right? So look to see when the information was updated. If the site is filled with typos, misspellings, graphics that don't work, links that don't work. It's probably not a professional site, so stay clear of it. And do please look for those contact and about us pages. And if it's not clear if the author is spewing opinion or fact, you might want to do some more research on the author, because you want them to be knowledgeable in the field you're writing about. So can Wikipedia be used for research? What do you guys think?
I use it sometimes as a starting point.
Yeah, same.
Anybody want to
I think
pull
it
that
can,
thread?
but it might not be reliable to cite it.
Yeah, so as a starting point, and let me see if I can get here. I put a link to the Merrill site. And so, you know, the reality is for any wiki, anybody can edit it, anybody can go in. I used to have my classes go in and hit the edit button and update their high school site with something that they knew was factual. To see how easy it is that any of us go in and hit this edit button and change what's on the site. But so you have to be a little wary of the information. Somebody could have gotten in there and mucked up with it before an editor could come back to make the fixes. But at the bottom, the references are often to primary links, and those external primary links can be useful for research. The other thing is, how many of you have ever gone to Wiki if you were trying to find images for your publications? Anybody? So what do you note when you see images on Wikipedia? What do you have to look for before you use it? You should look and see, usually if you click on the picture on the site, on this site, it'll let you know whether or not it's public domain or Creative Commons as far as copyright. What does public domain mean? Anybody edited a publication where you were looking around for photos or images or graphics? If you find an image on Wikipedia or on a government site and it says it's in the public domain, that means you can use it with no restrictions, right? It's free to use, even usually for commercial purposes. It's been put out there as basically a gift to the world from this agency or from other photojournalists who wanted to share. Often if you see under the copyright information, if it says Creative Commons, it'll have some restrictions. It might say you can use this for nonprofit use if you credit the photographer. So it'll have some stipulations attached. So just make sure you look and see what those stipulations are and follow them. Don't violate restrictions for copyright. But we have found some images. I actually have found for even slideshows and PowerPoints. I go through here, and a lot of agencies will put things up with no restrictions that you can use for publication purposes. So it can be used for background. It can be used for starting point and finding links to primary documents, Wikipedia. What about if you were doing a story? A lot of times newspapers will do sort of anniversary stories, right? It's been 5 years since this horrific murder. It's been 20 years since this tragedy. 9/11 is an example. Often newspapers, often every year, they'll come in on September 11th and do some kind of an update, some kind of a story about, you know, an update on deaths or some other problems. So there's a site called the Wayback Machine. The Internet Archive runs it. I'm going to click to it here real quick. And you can use it to find how pages looked on a particular day in history. And so, you know, run-of-the-mill times it's not that interesting, but if you're specifically looking to see, for instance, how CNN covered what the front page on CNN looked like on September 11th, 2001, you can do it. You can look for it here. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the CNN site. And I'm going to click on the 2001 year. And let me see if I can get down to September 11th. And you can see they have updates here. I think it's going to take a minute. It's trying to pull it up. So this is the homepage for CNN on September 11th, 2001. And it gave you updates. It was obviously updated a lot that day. You can see it's kind of shocking to look at this in 2020, just from a journalistic perspective on how different the websites looked 19, 20 years ago. But if you're doing a story on, 19 years later, what were we covering that day? What do I want to follow up on? This can be useful. So for journalism look backs, it's useful, but also for research papers, you can get a lot of interesting information here as well. So yeah, photos, a lot of the sites this day, they strip down.
Hello. Hey, how are you?
Hi, who is that?
Sure. Nice.
Hello? I'm not sure who we're getting there.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Anyway, so this was the page from 2001. What happened, a lot of the news sites on that day had to literally remove most of their images and graphics, because I know I was watching, I had just started class when the first plane went into the tower in New York, and we were clicking on our screens and it went down. The server crashed. Everybody wanted to see what the papers in New York and Washington were posting. And so they had to go to a sort of a reduced homepage to allow people to allow the site to still function with the massive traffic that came through on that day. But so this Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, allows you to see what the pages and the stories were from a particular moment in time. How many of you have used Google Scholar when you've done searches for sort of depth stories or for research? So Lindsay, do you want to tell us what you used it for?
I can't recall a time for a story specifically, but for a lot of research that I've done for school projects and even journalistic school projects, it's pretty easy to find academic sources and sources from journals and things that are peer reviewed, which is really helpful.
Yeah. So I'm going to click on here, scholar.google.com, and I'm just going to type in, I typed in Brett Kavanaugh as far as, let me go back for a minute. So you can see you can click through for articles or for case law, which if you're writing about somebody who's, Brett Kavanaugh was obviously the Supreme Court nominee and he's now in the court. If you want to see some of the decisions that he's authored, you could look through case law. But if you want to see stories he's written or been cited in, you could click through the articles. And it looks, this one actually, I think he was an author on. So a book review reviewed by Brett Kavanaugh in 2014. What's nice about this, there are a lot of things that are nice. So it's pulling down sources that you might not find readily through a simple Google search. It is peer reviewed, it is scholarly. If you're writing a paper, this little shortcut is just great because it gives you the citation in proper format for whatever you need. But for journalistic purposes, some of the other links here are really interesting. You can find related articles readily that are about this topic. My computer's slowing down because I have a lot open. And then you can also look to see how many people have cited this particular article. Why is that important? How many people cited something important for credibility purposes? If it's been cited by a lot of people, it's probably got a higher credibility, right? It's something that a lot of people are finding valuable. So it's a good way to find a lot of related material that's credible quickly. And by the same token, we could have looked for Brett Kavanaugh here for cases, opinions that he's been an author on, and seen, you know, where he stood on a lot of prominent cases. So Google Scholar can be very helpful for depth stories and for research. All right, just regular old Google. And what I'm going to do, I think, is now I'm going to go into, I'm going to come out of full screen so I can do some things simultaneously here. You can use Google to be a much better search tool than just the way you're used to searching. So normally, if you want to find something on Google, what do you do? What do you put in?
Keywords.
Keywords, right? A couple of words, and that's it. Like we put in a word or two, and boom, you hit it, and you get a lot of returns. But you can make it much more advanced by typing in a couple of other things. If you use minus, it'll eliminate a subset of that search. So I keep coming back to my terriers because I like to see the pictures that come up. But let me just pull up. So we're in a regular old, let me just go to regular old Google. And if we wanted to look for dog breeds, but not rat terriers, you would just do this, the minus rat terriers. And you get lots of breeds and no rat terriers. So sometimes, you know, it's kind of silly to exclude rat terriers from the search, but there might be a reason to exclude a certain subset of what you're searching for. And simply by typing in minus immediately followed by those words will exclude it from the search. So that can make your search a little smarter. You can also search by site. And we actually had last year, I don't know those of you who are at Maryland, but we had a guy who calls himself like a guru of happy searches on Google. Dan Russell came in. And he said it's often smart to not only search by topic, but to say what site you want to pull it from. And I know I said, well, why wouldn't you just go to that site and search there? And he said, Google's algorithms are actually a little smarter than a lot of news sites' algorithms. So you're better off, if you want to search the Post or CNN or some of these sites, to use Google's tool for this. So here, if I wanted to do a search and see what CNN has been writing about George Floyd, I could put site:/CNN.com to restrict the returns in the query just to CNN. So I'm going to go back into Google and do that. So all I've done is add site:/CNN.com. So the returns I get in my query are all from CNN. They're all about George Floyd. And apparently this is a more efficient way to search on CNN than going straight to that site. So I was a little surprised by that, but he swears by it. So I'm going to share that with you. And you'll see a lot's been written over the last few weeks because of that horrible police killing. So that's another restriction that can save you time and be helpful. And you can also then search, we talked about domain names and government sites being useful because you know that they're not hoax sites. And so if you wanted to look up information on the North Korean leader and exclude some of the junk that might pop up, you could search just for .gov sites, right? So I could put his name in with the restriction site:/gov, and I'm going to do that. If you're looking on government sites for information on the Korean leader, the North Korean leader, what sites might you expect to come up high? What US government sites would you expect to have stuff on him?
Maybe like Department of Defense.
Okay. And I was thinking, I don't know, State Department maybe, right? Or CIA. So let's see what we pull up from government sites on him when we do this query. So there's a bunch of stuff coming up from the couple of sites, from the couple of site information on the White House, CIA. I'm not sure what the Buchanan House is. Oh, it's a member of Congress, and his information is posted on their congressional site. U.S. embassies, yeah, members of the U.S. Senate. So that really restricts it. If you're looking for very specific information, you want it to be accurate, you want it to be on point, restricting the domains that you pull up in your query can be really helpful. And .gov would be useful for looking up this leader. You can also restrict your searches in Google by file type. So let's say you know that something is on an Excel spreadsheet. You're doing a government search, and you want to only look for spreadsheets on this data. So to restrict it by file type, you would use the words file type :XLS for Excel. And I put 2019 Montgomery County, and you'll see, what do you think that'll pull up? Anybody? So my intention was to pull up Montgomery County, Maryland information, but you can see I should have been more restrictive here, right? So think about what you're actually asking for when you do these searches, and I should have restricted it by state as well, because I'm starting to get a lot of information from Kansas and other states. But you do see what it pulls up. It's having a hard time with this. Let's pull it into my download. But it's given me a spreadsheet and not just some website. So that can be useful too when you might search for something by JPEG, right, for just photos, or .gif, GIF if you want to look for graphics. So you can restrict the kinds of returns you get through Google as well. So knowing some of these terms that you can use just in regular old Google is great, but do be aware, right, that Google has its own advanced search page, which allows you to not have to memorize all those things I just gave you. So here's what and this one you should write this URL down, guys. For advanced search, it's google.com/advanced_search. So let's say we wanted to look for wire-haired terriers. And so we could say all of these words, which might split the words apart, or we could say this exact phrase, which would probably be more efficient. It's like using quotation marks in Google. You can say, I want to see stuff in English or some other language if you're more comfortable in another language, so you'd look for other countries or regions. You can say, what time period? Do I want to look for the last 24 hours if you were doing a breaking story? Or do I want to look for past week or month or year? Because this is sort of a random search, I'm going to say past year. You could restrict your site or domain right here. So I could have put .com or .gov. You could say, is this a term in the body of the page, in the title, in the URL? So you can say where you expect the term to appear. Again, you can restrict it by file type. So that's important if you just want spreadsheets or images. And this is important if you're publishing, if you're the editor of your publication and you're looking for images. So if we had restricted this to, let's come back down to JPEG. Where is it? Oh. Not seeing the JPEG here. We might have to go to the more open search. But you can say, I want to filter it by how I can use the material. So the last line here, free to use, share, or modify, even commercially, that's public domain, right? That you can use that. You've got full rights. It's good to go. You can put it on your site. And then there are other restrictions as you move up the line here. So free to use, share, or modify. Just see what you know, what the usage rights are before you grab an image from the web. And so here's my search, and I start to get lots of cute pictures. This is what my dog looks like after he's been cleaned, had a bath. And you can see I didn't restrict it by domain, so I'm getting different kinds of pages and sites here. Why don't I give you a minute? Let me stop the share. Did everybody grab down that URL? It was google.com/advanced_search. I'm going to stop the share and go ahead into advanced search and play with that for a minute, guys, and see, you know, something that you might want to have information on, whether it's COVID or Black Lives Matter or, I don't know, working at home. Do a search and see if you're comfortable with putting in some of those restrictions on your own. So go ahead and pull that up. Is everybody finding it okay and able to manipulate it a little bit? Anybody have any issues? So it's something to play with a little bit, but I think it's really valuable if you're looking for things in a hurry and looking for very distinct things. Using some of those parameters are helpful, right? Let me go back in just a little bit more to show you. We're going to be near the end soon. Go back into sharing. Okay. So within the Google site, it's also got an area for you to see what's trending in search. And that can often be useful for stories or finding stories even, seeing what people care about. So it's the page is called Google Trends. I'm going to look here for police brutality or police violence, let's say. And you'll see that you can narrow it down to where you want to search. And I'll put worldwide. You can say in what time frame. I'm going to say, I'll leave it at past 12 months. You can tell it what kinds of stories. Is it news? Is it health? Is it hobbies? I'm just going to leave it all. And you can also restrict the kinds of things you want to search for. Do you want a broad web search? Do you want to look for images? Do you want to look on YouTube? And then it'll show you. So this is a worldwide search on police violence. And there's a pretty dramatic uptick here, right? And so when did it go up, these searches? Anybody?
The recent murder of George Floyd. Yeah.
Huge uptick here, the murder, and then the protests that have happened since then. There was a huge uptick. There's been some gradual decline, but it's still a lot more searches than had been happening over the rest of the year. So good to know that you can see, what people are searching for. It might even help you with search terms if you're creating pages for publication and you want to know what kind of terms to use, SEO terms for your headlines or for search terms in your story. Sometimes looking to see what terms are trending here can be helpful. The other thing is, if you were publishing a page, if you were doing a story for your publication and you needed a visual, you can click on these little less than, greater than symbols here. And it gives you the embed code. So I could grab this script here, just copy it, the whole thing, do a Command C and paste it into the code of my page to replicate this image on my page. So it not only can give you story ideas, it can give you visuals for your page if you are interested in that. So I like to show Google Trends for those reasons. We won't do a search on that. How many of you are familiar with using Google Images to check on the veracity of photos? Anybody? Okay. So yesterday, Rebecca sent you 2 photos and you were probably like, why is she sending me these 2 images for Chris? It's because I want you to check and see how you can use Google Images to see, either to check an identity of a person or to check to see if something that was sent to you by a reader, oftentimes we allow reader content to go on a site. If people have taken pictures of floods or riots or damages, they send in images sometimes to news sites, but a news site's interested in publishing it if it's correct, but not if it's a hoax. So Google Images allows you to do some checking of images to see if they are what they purport to be or to identify people. So I gave you an image of this fellow here. Do you have that from your email yesterday? What I want you to do, I'm going to stop sharing in a second. I want you to go into images.google.com and you can click on, I'm going to show you what it looks like before I release you here. Oops. Sorry, I need to. So it's a really clean little page, and if you click on the camera here, and then if you'll need to download your image to your desktop, and then you can just click on the file to upload it. So I'm going to release you. You're going to go into Google Images, click on the camera, and choose that first headshot that I gave you to see if you can figure out who it is, okay? So go ahead and do that. A few of you might be in an unfair advantage on this, but the rest of you probably don't know him. I saw a couple of smiles, so you already knew who he was. Anybody still searching? You should find some direct hits for him on the internet. He's a popular fellow. Somebody, Colleen, I don't want you to say anything. A couple of you, I don't want you to say anything, but the rest of you who aren't from the Maryland, who is he? Did you find him?
I found him. That's Kevin Blackistone, who's a professor at the Merrill College of Journalism at the University of Maryland.
And did you find pictures that looked like him, or did you find that exact photo?
I found that exact photo on the Merrill website.
Yeah, very good. So sometimes sometimes they're not as popular as Kevin, and but they can do facial recognition and identify from similar photos. But in that case, I pulled it down from the Merrill site, so he was right there for you to find. I gave you a second image, and I want you. Let me just. I'm not going to share with you, but I'm going to tell you that image had been sent in. It's a picture of. You see grass with a lot of trash on the ground, and it had been sent into a news site purporting to be trash left in Hyde Park by global warming protesters. So do the same thing you just did. Go ahead and download and then upload into Google Images that photo and see if you can figure out if it is indeed trash left in Hyde Park by global warming protesters. Fire it up.
And Chris, we'll need to wrap in a couple of minutes.
And I'm almost on my last page there, Tom.
Okay.
Are you finding anything related to that? Okay. So sometimes you find an identification for somebody that you need, and sometimes you're able to find that what you were given isn't what it's supposed to be. And I think what you're seeing, Anjali, what did you were shaking your head, yes, what did you find?
Yeah, I found a Guardian article basically fact checking that the photo was from a marijuana festival, and it wasn't even taken in Australia. So
yeah, so sometimes you can use it to find the reverse, which is if something isn't true, it's a fake and you shouldn't use it. So that's probably a good place to stop. I just want to say thanks and good luck, guys. I know it's in there's some unusual circumstances this summer, but it's also a pretty cool time to be. You have a lot of really big stories that you can probably get a piece of by hitting the local angles at your publications. So I wish you a lot of luck in getting your hitting the ground running and getting some good stories at your publications. I think you'll have fun. So thanks for letting me take some of your time up this morning, and good luck, okay?
Good, thank you, Chris. Can we give her a hand?
Thank you.
Nice to see some familiar faces. Thanks, guys. I'm going to hang in and listen to some of the other conversation if that's okay.
Oh, sure.
Please do. And actually, it looks like some of our intern panel is coming on board. So we're going to take just a couple-minute break as our next panel comes in, and you'll hear from people who have been through the internship experience to get a read on how you can make the most of your opportunity. So we'll wait for the rest of our people to arrive and be back with you at 11:35. Hey, Hannah, it's Rebecca.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining us. We're on just a tiny bit of a break
Okay.
so that people just don't get sad and lonely. I see that you're, oh, it's Samantha that's waiting a couple. So Samantha Subin's going to join us. And then.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
And Tom, who's our third panelist? I can't remember.
It's Oyen from Morgan State.
Yes. Okay. I'm sure she'll be on momentarily. So
yeah, we have emailed about this, so I fully expect her to sign on.
Oh, sure, sure. And so we've just finished up Chris Harvey's
hey,
presentation.
She just showed up.
Oh, good. All right. So let me admit her.
Okay.
Hi, Oyen. Okay. So Samantha, we're just on a short break. Our attendees are taking a little bio break, and in about 2 minutes, we'll start up again. Hi, Owen, how are you? Looks like people are coming back on. Great.
Good.
And I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to the chat. Chris has put her PowerPoint presentations in PDF format in the chat. If you can't download those or having trouble, just let me know, and I'll make sure that they get to you. All right. And Tom, it looks like most of us are back or coming on.
Okay. So let's roll.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope everybody's back, and if not, we'll pick you up as we go along. We're going to now do a panel. We have two panels discussions that we'll do between now and closing time at 12:30. This first one is features 3 of our MDDC interns from last summer, and they're going to be talking about making the most of your internship. And let them, because we have all 3 in here now, right, Rebecca?
Yep.
Okay, great. So let's start by letting them introduce themselves to you, and we're going to do it alphabetically by last name. So we'll start with Oyen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Could you turn up just a little?
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, I'm on my Mac, so let me get a little bit closer. Is it better now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, hi everybody. My name is Oyen Adedoyan, and I interned at the Baltimore Sun last summer as a features intern.
And your college is?
Oh, and I go to Morgan State University, of course.
Morgan State. Excellent. Okay, Hannah.
Yeah, I am Hannah Himes. I interned at the Frederick News Post. I kind of didn't have a specific title, but I did some features and some page design things. And I graduated from the University of Maryland in December.
Excellent. Okay, and Samantha.
My name is Samantha Subin. I'm a rising senior at the University of Maryland studying journalism. Last year, I interned at the Daily Record, where I did a lot of mostly business writing, because that's kind of my interest, but I did a range of different things.
Okay, thanks. Good to see you again. Thanks to all 3 of you for being here and volunteering your time to share your wisdom with the people who are going into the intern program. I think Ellie is the only one who's actually started of the MDDC interns, and the others will be starting between now and the end of the month. So it's coming at a good time for all of them. So what I'd like to ask you to do is let's have each of the panelists, if you would, take 5 minutes, share your most valuable lessons learned, and if you have an interesting anecdote about how you learned it, painfully or not, then that's fine too. And then we'll open it up for questions, and that should leave us about 10 minutes, and people can ask anything that they want to. Okay, so we'll start back with you, Oya.
Okay, so for starters, I thoroughly enjoyed my internship at the Sun. I had an interesting situation where I was mainly features, but I also kind of did a little bit of breaking news as well when they needed it. And I would say some of the most helpful advice with getting the most out of your internship is kind of pushing every skill that you have. So for me, that meant I had a little bit of experience with editing, Premiere, and things like that. And some visual experience. And I remember one time I was in the newsroom and I was kind of pitching some breaking news story idea on, I think one of the chefs got featured to be, no, this was a different one. This was Urban Axes. There's a lot of stories. You're also gonna have a lot of clips by the end of this. But I got to do a story with Urban Axes, which is a fun axe throwing kind of place in the city. And I was talking with the editor and he was like, what's the best way to represent the story? You know, you could either write it or, you know, you could do a video. And I'm like, it's giving me, you know, more of a visual appeal because, you know, when you're throwing axes, you can hear the sound of it, you can see it. It's very kind of shocking. And I would think in a written format, that story would have lost a little bit of that value. And so I had a little bit of experience with video, but I wasn't fully confident. And I expressed that. And with that, I was able to go out on the scene with a reporter on visuals at the Sun and kind of be able to create a video for the Sun, even though my main role there was a reporter and I was doing features and breaking news. I was able to also garner some video clips through that. So I would just say kind of exhaust every resource and exhaust every talent or, you know, everything that you've been practicing yourself, because you never know if you could make yourself even more useful and even more valuable for that. And you're going to look unique as well and really impress your editors that way.
Excellent. Good advice. And if they would let you do something like that at the Sun, that shows that they had some confidence in you as well. Sometimes the larger the paper you go to, the more pigeonholed you might be. But you had a very varied experience. So hats off to you for that. Okay, Hannah.
Yeah, I was nervous, so I wrote down a bunch of like little things, I guess. But I definitely agree to pursue the things that you're interested in, even if it's not necessarily what you went in to do. Like I really wanted to try page design, so that was something that I also kind of got to dabble in while I was there. So the first thing I wrote down was to ask all of your questions, even if they feel like stupid questions, because like I still ask my editors a million questions a day. And oh, I forgot to mention, I work at the Frederick News Post now, so I'm still bothering them with a million questions, because I think it's just better to know like what you're trying to do, versus just to feel like you shouldn't have asked the question. And then I also wrote that if you're feeling overwhelmed, that's okay. I think like my first or second day, I was really overwhelmed. I went home and I just started crying and I was like, I can't do this. I'm really upset. And I've never had this many stories and I don't know what's going on and I don't know how to use this system. And my mom was like, it's fine. It's your second day. Like you'll learn, you'll get used to it. And she was right. And then another thing I wrote down was that if other reporters offer to take you out for coffee or like try to involve you in the newsroom culture and like newsroom jokes, to kind of lean into that, because I think like one of the best parts of the job is who you work with. So if they're trying to kind of pull you into that camaraderie, like take part in that. And then I guess the other thing would be like just to be open about what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, either both at the internship but then afterwards. Like if you want to work at the publication that you're at, like be like, hi, I'm graduating in X time, like kind of hint toward that. I think if that's something that you want to do, because I kind of did that, and then they called me in November and they said, hey Hannah, we have a spot. So I think that's something to do as well.
Good. Well, they will definitely pay attention to that. I know because when I talked to the editors at the News Post at the end of last summer, they said, you know, the only reason that we're letting her go at all is because she needs to go back and graduate. But we're going to try to get her back here on a permanent basis because two reasons. A, because you did so well. B, because you were open and communicated to them that you'd like to come back. And so they followed up on that. So congratulations. Well done. Samantha, what's up?
Yeah, so I had a great time working at the Daily Record last summer. One of the great things about working at a small paper like that is I really got the opportunity to explore what I wanted to and take on big stories, which I thought, because I had more time to work on them, which was really good for me because it gave me a lot of clips that I could use for internships and applications and stuff like that, and it's actually helped me along the way. I guess my advice I would give to everyone is to double check everything. I mean, they teach you that in journalism school, but I can't reiterate it more. It's especially important once you're in the field. I think I had like one situation where something I wrote, I thought I had double checked it, but you know, it needed to be fixed before we sent it out. So just make sure to, you know, be conscious of that, because you think that you might be, you know, you might have it good after a while, but you need to always make sure that you're going through. What I typically did was I made a list of stuff that I needed to double check before I submitted a story, which helped me since then to make sure, you know, that I don't make any mistakes, that I'm double checking my sources and that type of thing. The other thing I would also say is don't be afraid, as the other previous interns said, don't be afraid to pursue what you're interested in, and also don't be afraid to take on something that you're not familiar with. A lot of the times I pitch stories about, you know, I was very interested in the restaurant industry, so I pitched stories about that. I was interested in small businesses and nonprofits, so I pitched stories about that. But sometimes my editor, Tom, also gave me stories that, you know, were a little bit out of my comfort range. I think the biggest one I can think of is he had me write a story about stock buybacks and tax code and the changes that were coming in 2019. And I hadn't had much familiarity with that because I hadn't taken accounting yet, and I hadn't taken a couple other courses that would have been crucial. And I kind of taught myself that. And those clips have become stuff that I have used when I apply to applications. And I was actually proud of my ability to, you know, learn something that's kind of complex that I'm not really needing to know right now as a student, but I will need to know in the future. So like I said, don't be afraid to take on something that's unfamiliar to you. Like the other interns said, you know, you should try to be a part of the team. I took people up for coffee and lunch dates, and you know, it's kind of hard that you might not be in the office this summer, but like try to interact with your peers, your colleagues offline or in some other way, because they have a lot of good tips that they can provide for you and a lot of good experience. I guess kind of the last thing I would say is, you know, just get the most out of it, you know, pursue what you want to do. It might seem overwhelming at first. It was a little bit for me, but once I got into the swing of things, I was writing stories every day, every other day. And I've gotten, like I said, some amazing clips that I keep using.
So Samantha, how many clips would you estimate that you had over the summer?
I think I had about 30.
Okay. Not bad at all. I'll ask the same thing to Oyen and Hannah. How many clips would you guess you had?
Oh, Hannah, you can go.
I'm not sure. I mean, yeah, maybe around the same amount, maybe like an every day type. It just, I guess, depends on the story and like if it was like a brief or an actual story. I think I definitely write more now, but when I was interning, it was good because like I was given the time it took me to do the story versus like feeling as rushed as maybe you do when it's your job.
Right. Good. Okay. Oyen?
Yeah, I would say the same as Samantha, maybe roughly like 30 clips. Because if you're on breaking news, you're probably gonna just have more clips because the news cycle is a lot faster. So with a mix of that and features, I kind of got varying like amounts of time to do certain stories. So yeah, somewhere around 30 clips, which is pretty good. Definitely keeps you busy.
Let me also ask each of you to answer this briefly, then we'll open it up. I'm wondering were most of your stories your own ideas? Were you expected to come up with ideas for your own stories, or were they mostly assignments? Oyen, we'll go with you because you're bigger on my screen right now.
Well, for me, it was actually interesting. The first couple of days, I think maybe the first week, my experience was they assigned you stories just to get you familiar with the CMS and with just the structure of the newsroom. So that might be how they do things depending on your internship. But somewhere around the middle of my internship, my editor kind of sat with me, and we worked very closely throughout the entire thing, but my editor Kamaru sat with me and was saying, we're going to meet, tomorrow, and you're going to run through all of your pitches with me, which was kind of intimidating. Because, like I'd been jotting things down and jotting down story ideas that I wanted to do over time, of course. So we did sit at his desk, and the way the sun is set up, it was a very open space. So I knew, other people could hear, and I kind of ran through my pitches with him, and it was very intimidating, and he knocked down about 80% of them. But the 20% that he let me do, I felt very rewarded. And they were really good stories. One of them was a garden story that ended up on the cover of the Sunday Life and Travel section, which I really enjoyed doing. So yeah.
Good. Okay. Hannah, what was your experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of my stories were assigned, and then other ones just kind of grew out, kind of the same as what Oyen had said, but like they assign the stories and then you kind of grow from those where you can kind of pitch other ideas or follow-ups or updates or whatever. But yeah, I think in the beginning it was more because I was kind of also filling a space that they had, so a lot of times it was like just things that they needed to be covered, and that kind of worked out in that I could help them, but also then I had story ideas.
Right. And there's a little bit of testing going on too, because they're trying to see what you can handle. So you're more likely to get stories assigned to you at the beginning, because again, they're sort of trying you out. Well, I wonder how she'd be on this kind of story or that kind of story. And then the more they learn, the more confident they have, and then the more open they're going to be to your ideas. Samantha, how did it go for you in that regard at the Daily Record?
Yeah, I would say it was somewhat similar to the other interns. Most of the time, my editor gave me a lot of stories that needed to be covered. Sometime towards the middle, I started pitching my own, and a lot of times those kind of stemmed into some good stories that I had. But a lot of the time, it was assigned to me.
Okay. All right, let's open it up in general. Who's got a question?
I have a question. What's the best way to like kickstart the process of coming up with articles to pitch, like honing like a topic into a real pitch?
Okay, excellent question. Who wants to take a crack at that?
I would say I have a very whimsical approach to coming up with story ideas. I think just using your own curiosity, honestly, because in the newsroom especially, they, as much as you need that experience for your resume and just in general for your career, they also need you and your fresh kind of perspective. So lean into that. If you're genuinely curious about something, or you have a particular interest in maybe the immigrant community in Baltimore, or you speak Spanish and you want to kind of investigate a grassroots organization here. There was an ICE protest in last summer that I got to cover with the Sun, which was my first protest, and you can see how even that experience can lend into what's going on now in the world. So just genuinely being curious and being yourself. Don't just pitch ideas because you think that your editor will like them, but actually something that you're passionate about could turn into a very interesting story idea. So yeah, lean into your instincts.
I like that. Good answer. Samantha, Hannah, do you have anything to add on that?
For me, a lot of the times what I would do, and what I continue to do now, is follow kind of the big agencies or big businesses or big organizations in the area that I'm covering on Twitter. And a lot of the times I get some of my ideas from that or from their website. It doesn't work all the time, but I mean, it is kind of a way to get something unique and see what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think like for pitching ideas, I think a lot of times the question that I get asked if I am pitching ideas is kind of like why does the story matter, or why would people care about it? So I think if you go in to the pitch already knowing why you think it's valuable for readers, that's always a good thing to have ready, because people probably are gonna ask you that or be wondering why the story should be told.
Good advice all around. And building on that last point, Hannah, you've also got a higher chance for success with the idea if it's coming out of, if it's like a spinoff of coverage the paper has already done, because that helps you answer the why, because the story already has generated some interest, but you've come up with a different segment of it, which is related to the overall story, but it would provide a fresh look at something. So that can help you as well. Who else has a question?
What do you wish you knew going into your internship last summer? Like any background knowledge or specific skills that you think would have helped you transition or adjust any easier?
Anybody?
CMS like really kicked me in the butt. I don't know if it was just me. But when I was at the Sun, they were transitioning into the one that the Post uses. So it was a mess for everybody, which was kind of comforting because, you know, you weren't the new kid on the block, so to speak. But yeah, if you have any familiarity with the CMS that the news organization that you're going to uses, that'll definitely kind of give you a little bit of a head start. Even if you can connect with a reporter now that you know you'll be working with and kind of just be like, hey, can you give me some pointers on accessing that? Because I mean, at least in my experience, your editor will probably just throw you into a story, kind of like Tom said, to try you out, and you'll roughly, you know, have to figure out the nuances of how the site works and all that technical stuff that we don't really think about too often. That and also data journalism and just different ways that you can tell a story. For one of my stories, we did like a race to BWI, which was very cool, but I thought it would be even more interesting if we added like a graph to show like the different times that it took each reporter to get to the airport. And so that took I worked with a data reporter to kind of get that graph going. But if you have a little bit of that experience already, then that'll definitely take you like leaps and bounds ahead in your internship.
Good, very good observations. Does everybody know what she's referring to when she says CMS? Just want to be sure. Content management system, and it is that's such a great point to make, William, because newspapers are not great at training. They're great at assuming that you can do it. Just sit down and start typing, and you'll figure it out. But each content management system is different and has different quirks and different protocols and different terminology. And you need to take some time. That's time well invested at the beginning to learn that stuff, because you want to get to where very quickly where your mental energy is going toward the story and not to, oh, how the hell do I post this, or where am I supposed to send it next, or what's the code for this, or whatever. You want to learn that stuff as quickly as you can, master that, so as I say, so you can really concentrate on the content that you're producing, not how you're producing. Hannah?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I still struggle to use TCMS sometimes if I'm trying to like put something in a workflow that I don't know where it is or whatever. I guess the other thing for me, like I said, I wanted to really do some page design when I was there, but I had to spend a lot of time just being taught how to use InDesign, which kind of took away from the time I actually got to spend doing pages. It was still fun because like I did get to have that learning experience, but I think if you're like wanting to go in and do like photos or page design or something like that, if you have the prior knowledge of the like system that you'd be working in, and then that would be helpful.
Good point. Okay, Samantha?
I would say going into it, you don't have to answer every question in your story. I know a lot of the time I got tripped up because I wanted to answer everything, but you don't have enough space. And the good thing is those can always be used for other story ideas, whatever you haven't finished. But, you know, try to keep it as concise as you can without trying to do too much.
Good advice, Paul. Well, there's a familiar face from years gone by. Samantha and I know him. Hello, Steve. Don't know if you can hear us yet, but we'll get you. Steve's on the next panel coming up in a few minutes. Steve, we have room for about time for about one more question for everybody. Who's got another question?
I have a question about data journalism, which is nice because you guys kind of started talking about that anyways. I'm really interested in data journalism, and I like took some coursework in it at school. But like one thing I always struggle with is like finding the data for a story. So I was wondering if you have any tips on like come across that data, or like good government websites or like data sources for like business beats or politics beats to kind of start with.
Anybody?
I mean, I would,
Go ahead.
I would just say that's one of those things where you kind of ask the experts. So that's another way to kind of get in good with some of the reporters in your newsroom. Be like, hey, I'm really interested in data journalism. And data journalists love talking about data journalism. So, you know, if you really kind of email the data journalists at your paper and say, hey, I'm really interested in this. What are some of these sites that you use? They'll connect you right away. And it'll be a great way to also formulate a relationship. So I think kind of leading with I'm really interested, but I don't know where exactly to go. They'll kind of take it from there.
That is great advice, Ellie. Look at who's writing. If you see a story like that with that kind of information in the paper, just go approach that reporter, or ask your colleagues who's good at data journalism here, because I really want to learn that, and who can I talk to about that? I'm also wondering, Chris, are you still here?
Yeah.
She just posted. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say, looking at work that's been done by other organizations is really instructive too, like Investigative Reporters and Editors is a big national organization. Somebody in your newsroom is going to have a membership there, and you can go on their site and look at stories they've done. And if it's with a state highway data set, then you can probably find a similar one in Maryland, even if it was from another state. I know when I was running the news bureaus at Maryland, I would often look through and see what they've done and how we could localize it in Maryland. They have some great story ideas. And the Online News Association would be the other one. They post links to their contest winners, and they've done some amazing work.
Thanks, Chris. That's great advice. Ellie, when I was editor of the Daily Record, I always made sure that at least one or two of our reporters were members of IRE. I hope that hasn't fallen victim to subsequent budget cuts since I left the room, and maybe it has. But if it has, but again, you can ask around. Does anyone here belong to IRE? And then you could piggyback on that membership while you're there. Okay. Thank you all. We're out of time and running into the break for the next panel. So we'll stop it here. I want to say thanks very much for our panelists. Can we give them a clap out here? Yay!
Yay! And our panelists for our next segment, which is tips on working remotely and reporting remotely, are here. Does anybody need a break, or shall we take a moment? Feeling good? No, why don't we power on through? And actually, before we really power on through, I know, Tatiana, you had popped up. It looked like you had a question. Did you want to quick ask your question?
Oh, yes, real quick. And also thank you all for being here too. My question was, how do you best manage your time, especially if you were working with breaking news. What suggestions would you have for that?
Oh, that's like a great bridge question as well for interns.
Yeah.
And our panelists on the next panel, feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I definitely think there's like a groove to it. You kind of make your own schedule as you go along, if that makes sense. So judging by your editor and kind of how often whether or not they're super hands off or super hands on, you'll kind of realize, okay, so maybe the first hour of work I spend kind of reaching out to sources and sending out emails so that in the middle I can kind of do some breaking news stories and then come back to my office come back to your computer and get responses for interviews and things like that. So I guess my advice is just kind of play it by ear, but also make an internal schedule for yourself so that you know that you're kind of using your time wisely in that way.
Good advice. Who else? Anyone else want to chime in? I mean, I guess the other thing that I would say about that is always be working on something. Maybe it's been assigned, maybe it's not, maybe it's just an idea you're checking out, maybe it's something, but the last thing you want to do is be in the position where your editor comes by and says, so what are you working on today? Or what do you got cooking? And you say, nothing much, actually. You always want to have something in your, had an editor once who, one of his reporters said, always have something in your back pocket that you can pull out and tell me, I'm working on this, I'm working on that. He said, maybe I'll think it's a great idea, maybe I won't, but at least I'll know you're thinking. And so
good advice, Tom. I still have nightmares from you and Barbara.
That's good. It worked.
It did. Nothing concentrates the mind like an editor.
There you go.
As well as saying the deadline has been moved up an hour.
Well, yes, that too. Nothing like urgency.
Yes.
Well, why don't we then, with that sense of urgency, get started on our next panel, which is...
okay, you're into smooth segues today.
I'm really rocking it, I feel like. So I'll do introductions and then I'll turn it back over to Tom, who will be our moderator for this panel. So we've heard from Steve Lash, who is a reporter at the Daily Record, and Mike Feely, who is the executive editor at the Wilmington News Journal, and Naomi Harris, who is a reporter at the Capital Gazette. And they're going to share their special secrets for staying productive, sane, and reporting during these remote times. So, Tom, turn it over to you.
Well, you set the bar pretty high with that sane part. I don't know if we'll be able to get there or not.
That's our stretch goal. Okay,
stretch goal. Good. Well, thanks again. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming in for this part of the program. Let's start by just asking each of you, we'll use essentially the same structure we did for the interns. Take about 5 minutes, because we have about 25 minutes for this panel. So take about 5 minutes to say what your biggest tips would be in terms of working and reporting remotely, because that's what these interns are going to be doing all, if not most of their time this summer. And then we'll open it up for questions for the last 10 minutes. So we'll go by alphabetical order, last name. So Mike, you're up.
All right. Hi, everybody. So we've been here in Delaware kind of doing this remote working since March 13th. I actually had to stop in the office today, and that's the last day to have on my calendar. So I remember that's the last day we were in the office here. But I just want to talk a little bit about, you guys are entering an internship in a really crazy time. I get that in terms of coronavirus, in terms of everything going on in the news cycle right now. So there's a couple different things I think is very important. And first is how you kind of talk to your supervisor, to your paper. And I just, some real quick tips. They may seem simple, but the reality is they really help. So the first thing is just over communicate, over communicate, over communicate. Send a daily note to your supervisor. What are you working on? What are your open times? Things like that. Manage up though, and that's an important part of this, is how does you communicate? How does your manager want you to talk to them? You know, but do they want emails? Do they want calls? Do they want Zoom? Try to get that rhythm with a supervisor. But force them to set up a regular call at a regular time to have regular conversations so you can go over what it is you're working on. That could be once a week, twice a week, 3 times a week, could be whatever, but force them to do a Teams call like this or a Zoom call like this. Make sure you're setting sort of your tone. Editors want to hear from you. They want to know your perspective on things. You're in the room for a reason. It's to learn, but also to teach. So make sure you're helping set a tone a little bit. But also, it's important that you ask for a mentor during this program. So all editors and all papers are going nuts that every conversation now has to happen on Zoom. Instead of just kind of walking out and saying, hey, what's going on? You have to have 45 different conversations a day with Zoom. They may lose you. You know, out of sight, out of mind is a real thing. So ask for a mentor to say, like, I got 5 questions I really got to ask, but God, I'm so embarrassed to ask this, or I've pestered this person so much. So make sure you have a mentor. So, but also working remotely in terms of working the job is the same. We didn't cover the protests from our homes. We covered them from the streets. We're not doing our stories from our, you know, from our homes. We're doing them from the scenes. But we have to, you know, keep in mind, we have to maintain social distancing. We have to wear masks. We're not entering people's homes. We have to have these conversations about, during the protests, no one was allowed to be alone. So we had to pair everybody up. So we had to team people up. So you have to have those kinds of conversations. If you can't get somewhere, ask to do the interview, not on the phone, but ask to do it on Zoom. So you can see expressions in the face so they can show you things. Ask them to provide you art and video of something that you might not be able to get to. It makes our jobs a little bit harder. But we really, you know, good stories put you in a place. And if we're not there, we can't put you in a place. So my recommendation is, still do your best to get out and cover something, but seriously have that conversation. We don't want people out without masks. You know, we have PPE gear if we're heading into a hospital zone or a hot zone. You know, make sure you have that. If we're heading to protest, make sure you're having those conversations first. But our job is not done on the phone. So I'll stop there and kind of hand it off to somebody else.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Good advice all around. Naomi.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for letting me speak. This is really awesome. I think now is a great time to enter journalism, even though it is really kind of challenging at times and kind of confusing. I've noticed really that a lot of readers and sources that I have been really grateful for journalists being out here and still trying to get the job done. So the advice I'd give you guys in terms of tips for building up sources in particular, I started at the Capital Gazette a year ago, and I moved on to the education beat last September. So I was really getting into the groove of things when school closures and COVID-19 really hit the county that I cover. So I really recommend being kind of creative when it comes to building up sources, because it is not what it normally would look like. So like for me, for example, I would have gone to school board meetings and gone a little early to talk to possibly like parents or teachers or administrators who would attend a meeting either to do a presentation or to testify about something on the agenda. And that's not necessarily happening right now. Of course, a lot of things have moved online and streaming. So I kind of recommend being a little bit resourceful with the journalists around you, asking them who their sources are and how they kind of figured out how to connect with people. For me personally, I've found that social media is really useful. It's always been useful, but really right now, people they've become a lot more accessible. So for example, I've noticed a lot more Facebook groups that I've asked to be invited to kind of see who's talking and what are they talking about. There are more town halls and forums that I've seen recently than I had before COVID-19 really hit. So that's a good opportunity to see who's speaking and why, what are they talking about? What concerns are they bringing to the table? And also officials have made themselves really accessible, more so I think now than ever, because you kind of have to keep in contact. So I'm sure your newsrooms will have already had set up calls, but like for the Capital Gazette, we contact the county every week and we have like kind of a Zoom call, and officials will either present new information or like ready for questions depending on the latest update from the governor or the state superintendent. So that's really great because it allows for you to not only hear from sources firsthand, but also to come up with story ideas, which I think is really helpful for your internship moving forward. But yeah, I think now you just kind of have to be really creative and definitely reach out to your colleagues. A lot of my colleagues at the Capitol, we have created like data sheets. We've been trying to be as open as possible on Slack. We have like a daily Slack call. I'm always talking to my editor because we try to keep that communication open, because again, like now that you're not face to face and you can't just walk into your editor's office, you have to be a little bit more resourceful. But I think that allows for just more information to be like available for you to look at. So I just recommend for sure reaching out to your colleagues that you're going to be joining soon to see what stories they've been doing, what you find interesting, and how they gather those sources, as well as kind of using what systems are already in place at your newsroom, whether it's like a weekly check-in call, whether it's like the kind of data sheets they may have also been creating, because a lot of us are we're trying to stay on top of the kind of crazy day-to-day updates by creating these systems to try and report as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Naomi. Good. That was a really good blend between Mike's remarks and Naomi's, I think, because for years we've told our reporters, Mike, for God's sake, get out of the newsroom, go meet people, see people. You can't just cover the world on the internet. It's tempting, you think you can, but you can't always do that. And that rule still applies, except it's got limits now. So we've got to be more creative about how can we use technology well and not let it become too much of a crutch, and how can we help in not only in covering things and interviewing people, but in our own internal communications and sharing resources, whether it's Excel spreadsheets or whatever. So thank you both very much. Steve Lash, now you cover the appellate courts, and
yes.
One could say, well, this guy's got it pretty easy because all that stuff is offline. He just can sit there in his Orioles t-shirt and at home and cover his world. Somehow I bet it's not quite that easy.
Well, I don't know, Tom. When you were my boss, that was generally the attitude was, but no. Now in this brave new world, there is, as you said, technology can be a crutch, and it is in many ways. The crutches are email and text. Are the two biggest crutches I feel that I get from sources who say they prefer email and text. But in this brave new world, the first thing that you really have to do if you can't get out, which is often the case, is telephone. Talk to people, get their voices. If you don't speak to people, you don't know how they truly feel. You get a text, it's been their considered answer, or maybe an answer provided by somebody else. The best way is still even if you say it when you're in the office, work the phones. I mean, the classic example, you always saw all the President's Men. If we've seen the movie. Some people even remember it in real time. But I'm sure, Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Woodward and Bernstein got out of the office a lot. but a lot of the scenes are just Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein working the phones in the office, working the phones, and that is our reality now. Is primarily we're working the phones. And I have two. My kids are in their 20s, and they communicate primarily by text, email, Instagram, and all the other social media. And I said, "Have you ever heard that person's voice?" No. And the key is to make sure you hear the person's voice. Call first, and then basically call and let email come in second place or even third if you absolutely can't get out and see the person. But it's key, even in the appellate world. A lot of the appellate stuff, like in fact, this morning I covered a Maryland Court of Appeals was having a rules meeting. It was all by webcast, and generally, I mean, it's frustrating because usually after these meetings I would be able to go up to at least the members of the rules committee chairman, and ask him a clarification, get comment on what's going on, and find for my next story. And now that's it's more difficult because now I'm not there. I would have to call back later, and reporting from my dining room is a little lazier, to be quite honest, than reporting from downtown Baltimore, which is you feel you're in the office. You have that office setting, which is more conducive to actually, okay, this is where I go to work. And right now I'm reporting in a place where I usually eat. And I still eat, but I have the pizza on the side now during the course of this session. So I'm hoping that I'm not spitting up any pepperoni while I'm doing this. But but my basic advice is, if you can't get out, which of course is the first thing, is work the phones and leave the electronic technology, leave the non-Alexander Graham Bell technology somewhere else. Although you probably use FaceTime, you can certainly FaceTime, as what we're essentially doing now, and having a decent conversation. Which works for those of us who are of a certain age, and it's a nice new technology for us.
Exactly. Well, I'm glad you paid proper homage to the telephone, because it's still maybe it's having a resurgence in this pandemic time. I don't know, because it's still a great tool. I remember when I was in the newsroom there. You could tell there's a generational difference between reporters. I would talk to a reporter of a certain age, and we'd talk about a story, and the first thing I'm thinking of a couple of people in particular, the first thing they would do is go to their desk and start working the phones. People of a different generation, a younger generation, the first thing they would do was go to their desk after we had the assignment conversation and start working the computer and see what they could find online. So
I don't know who you have in mind, Tom.
All right, well, we got about 10 minutes left, so let's throw it open for general questions here. Who's got a question for these folks? Who's still awake? Well, at the moment, I'm just getting pictures of the panel, so I don't know if we've got other.
I have a quick question. I've been working at the Baltimore Business Journal. It's my third week there. But one thing I'm noticing with remote reporting is it's really hard to kind of get in with that camaraderie of the newsroom. Like, how do you suggest doing that?
Great question. So if you're not there and you can't just walk next door to get a cup of coffee together or go to lunch or whatever, how do you compensate?
Yeah, we've tried some different things here in Delaware, from bring your pet to the morning meeting day to we had a little bit of a parking lot happy hour where everybody was 6 feet apart, brought their own beer and no food. So we've been trying different things to just. And they're few and far between. We're not doing them enough, but just trying different things like making people turn their cameras on during meetings. Just a little something to have that. I know from a reporter standpoint here, they're having different hikes and things like that together. But I think it's really up to an organization to say, like, what ways can we do it? And we're just trying, like I said, trying little things to put smiles on people's faces.
Good. I'm glad you're really thinking about that and addressing that. Mike, would it be if someone goes into an organization that's not doing anything in that regard, Would it be appropriate for the intern maybe to bring that up and volunteer and say, maybe can I help organize something?
I'd say 100%. Again, everyone is going at 100 miles an hour. And so this kind of stuff might not be what someone's thinking about. So I would say bring it up. And matter of fact, the little parking lot picnic was a reporter said, hey, we all haven't seen each other in a while. Why don't we try this? And I said, as long as no one tells HR, let's do it. And our HR is in Rochester, so they're far enough away to that we can hide it. So as long as everybody, had their mask and stayed away and, respect each other's distance, I didn't think we were having a problem. But people want to hear, editors want to hear suggestions and not feel like they have to be responsible for maintaining everyone's being happy, everyone get fulfilled. It's like we need things to bubble up from the bottom.
Right. Great. Okay.
I also have a response specific to the Baltimore Business Journal. With the Baltimore Business Journal, if you want to just break the ice, give Melody Simmons a call. Melody Simmons, just call Melody Simmons and ask her for advice. And then an hour and a half when you get off the phone, you'll feel okay. Now, I've had enough of my colleagues.
I'll tell her you said that.
No, I'm not kidding. She is certainly the one to contact.
Yeah, and I think in every newsroom there is kind of that connector, that sort of den mother person. It's not always a woman, of course, but I definitely kind of just making yourself available. And then I think earlier Oyen had talked about, if you want to know something about some aspect of the newsroom, kind of check everybody's byline and go and specifically ask that person. So it can feel a little overwhelming to say, go find yourself a mentor. But remember, one person doesn't have to be everything to you. You can have different mentors for different things. Like if you want to know about data journalism or like how someone takes that terrific digital photograph or anything, it's totally cool to reach out and be like, I really liked what you did here and there. How do you do it? And people will talk to you. So I definitely feel like if you just kind of put yourself out there a little bit, you can start to build some camaraderie.
Good advice. And yes, the aforementioned Melody Simmons played that role in the Daily Record newsroom when I was there. And yes, Steve, she was the one I was referring to when I talked about the reporter of a certain generation who started working the phones.
Yes.
On the way back to the desk, she was working the phone.
Yes.
Naomi, anything to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think because reporters are kind of missing like the face-to-face interaction, a lot of us are trying to figure out ways to connect. So like at the Capitol, for example, we've created a trivia night. So every Friday, we'll have a Zoom call where you can like log in if you want to and have a trivia night. So I recommend like seeing what possibly some of the reporters have started to do, especially because now it is intern season, and we just got a Report for America fellow, and so we're trying to think of creative ways to include her because it is kind of hard to build that like camaraderie, like you said, on like over the computer.
Right.
So I definitely recommend reaching out to other reporters. I think it was Rebecca who mentioned reading some stories or seeing like what they've covered and how you can reach out to them. That's definitely a great way to connect with someone. And I mean, it might feel awkward, but honestly, a lot of this is awkward. People drop off on Zoom calls on accident. Sometimes you don't hear someone over the phone. Like, it's okay. Like, it's just, I think it's about the effort and the intention because they'll notice that and they'll respond positively to it.
Good, thanks. We got time for one more question. Who would ask it?
I have one. So this is like just any general advice that you can give to feel like more professional in your own home. Because I think I'm working at the Baltimore Sun this summer, and I was sort of counting on like having the commute and like that distance of like going into the office and then being like, oh, okay, like, I'm a professional, but now I'm just going from my bedroom to my brother's old room. So do you have any advice on that front?
I mean, I can go first.
Oh, sorry, you want to go for it?
Oh, I don't care. I don't want to step over anybody. What I've been doing, and because, oh my God, the beginning of this, I barely put pants on. You know what I mean? Like, it was getting ridiculous. And then I realized, like, you know, do the routine. Get up, get a shower, shave, make a lunch, you know, things like that. Like just everything. And then, you know, I don't know what everybody's situation is, but I created a workspace of which, you know, I try to avoid my family, you know, and just do that work and take breaks for gosh sake. I also learned in those first couple of weeks of doing this, you know, I was signing on at 6:30 in the morning, and when I look up, it's 7 o'clock at night, and you're like, oh my God, my head is killing me. Like, but now you got to take breaks, you got to eat lunch, you got to get away from it. So you have to force yourself to kind of, like, I've been putting collared shirts back on rather than t-shirts, and wearing shoes rather than and pants rather than shorts, you know, just as something to say, like, let's get back in the swing of things.
Good. Who else?
Me. I have a question about the protest in specific.
Yeah.
We see the journalists are being attacked by the police. So my question is, what suggestions would you recommend it?
So you're talking about what suggestions you would make to journalists to if they are attacked by the police or approached by the police?
Yes, because for me it's so important to be in the first line, because you can see the reaction of the police and the reaction of the protest, but you are in the middle. For example, a journalist from CNN was taken for the police. So my question in specific is what I can do and how I can protect myself and my rights as a journalist, because this is part of the censor for me.
Okay.
I'm not sure if
Got it.
you understand.
No, excellent.
Okay.
Excellent question.
Thank you.
I just wanted to be sure that we were understanding it correctly.
Okay. Thank
who
you
would
so
like
much.
to take a crack at answering that?
Well, I've had the unfortunate responsibility of having 3 of my staffers be detained so far in the last couple of including one who caught it on his video. So that was kind of fascinating. And my thinking is our staff did nothing wrong. We made bigger, much bigger press passes. And instead of, you know, Delaware Online, we put USA Today Network, hoping that would be a little more, you know, noticeable. But there comes a point where if the police do not care, you sort of just, you're kind of done. And our lawyers are saying, just, you have to go through the process. Now, luckily, you know, as soon as I find out, we're calling our lawyers are on the way, or administrative, like there's something going on in the background. But if you need to identify yourself, you need to speak out. But even in that case, it hasn't always worked, and you may have to go through the process and then let your editors and company leaders kind of take it from there. And that has happened in all 3 of our instances, where in the last instance was, again, very publicly, because it was done on live, Facebook Live. You know, I'm on with the camera in the governor's office, another editor's on with the state police, and our folks are on with lawyers. So everyone's doing everything in the background to get people out. But you know, fighting, arguing, pushing back, or something like that is just going to make the incident worse. You know, it's going to cause an arrest. And there comes a point where you have to just be respectful after you've stated your case, and let, you know, your editors do the work to get you freed.
So were these people actually arrested?
So no, everyone was detained. And you know, this is the issue that we run into. It's like people are detained, and it's hours, you know, and it's pain. It's you know, 2 were in Philadelphia and 1 was in Dover, Delaware, and it's a painful couple hours for everybody, because you're waiting. Now, luckily in Philadelphia for us, we had 2 people detained in Philadelphia. One of the police officers knew it was a joke, you know, knew it was. So she was texting us from the one photographer's phone saying, just so you know, she's being detained, You know, she'll call you as soon as this is over. We have her camera gear protected, you know. So there's not 100% agreement within police about these issues. It is a painful process, and there comes a point where you work through the process. Can I just beg, though? I need to beg everyone, and I've been begging my staff. Your first instinct when you are freed is to call your supervisor, not start tweeting about it. Okay? Call your supervisor. Let them walk you through the process. Okay? In every instance, someone's either gone on Facebook Live or tweeting. Have a 5-minute call with your supervisor and/or attorney before you go public. No one's going to stop you from going public, but just let everyone know you're okay. Have a quick debriefing, and then everybody can go on their way.
Right. That's in everybody's best interest.
Yes.
So,
I would add to that, the Reporters Committee has some really good resources. I mean, certainly, Mike is totally right. If you're freelancing, you connect with the publication you're writing for ahead of time and afterwards. But the Reporters Committee has a really good tip sheet for before you go to the protest. You know, make sure you have some of these details and pieces of information that you'll need. Like, you should be writing your attorney's number on your arm or the Reporters Committee hotline, because you can't guarantee that you'll have paper. Think about when you're going into any situation that could be precarious, and this is not just protests, this is anywhere, make sure you have a plan on how to get out and contact information. So the Reporters Committee has a great tip sheet on this. A Friday Planner a couple weeks ago, we pushed that out as well. So, and then I also wanted to follow up just Anjali's question about how you create, like a more professional environment. One of the things that's helped me has literally been to commute, which is walk around the block, because it gives you like a start time and an end time, and it gets you out of the house. Otherwise, you might not leave the house, which is a little scary, and kind of create a rhythm of your day, whatever it is.
Also, Anjali, I would add, and I'm just reinforcing what you're already doing because I don't see a problem, but just be mindful if you're having conversations like this, or even if you're FaceTiming or whatever, be mindful of your background, that it's going to look at least semi-professional, and doesn't have all sorts of personal stuff or clutter or whatever. Your background is fine. There's a bookshelf there, and all that sort of stuff. But sometimes, particularly if you're having a conversation because you're sort of rushed and you're not where you usually are, like Rebecca's background right there. That's what I often see when I do these things with
my
Rebecca.
Zoom room.
But anyway, but just be aware for that, because there have been a couple of times I've had done something quickly and all of a sudden been thinking, uh-oh, what's over my left shoulder there that everyone seems to be looking at. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Okay, we have finished in terms of time. I'm sure there's still some questions. Rebecca, we can supply email addresses, right?
Yeah, and I would recommend also that you guys connect with one another. Some of you are at your publications through an MDDC internship. Some are looking for freelance opportunities. Some are working at internships in other ways. But I will send an email out to all of you so that you can connect with one another. Just a couple housekeeping items. I mentioned our trauma awareness workshop with the DART Center next Wednesday, the 24th. That's, I think, going to be a really valuable program specifically for journalists around the protests and how to cover traumatic events, how to engage with people who have experienced trauma and be aware of them as sources. So that will be helpful. And then as part of our Into the Newsroom series, beginning July 1, Tom will be our first guest speaker. We're going to do just a 45-minute session every other Wednesday, looking at some really specific topical skills. So Tom's going to talk about how to interview remotely, and build rapport. Then we're going to, on the 15th, Graham Cullen from the Frederick News Post will talk about digital photography. We'll have Brian Sears from the Daily Record talk about FOIA and PIA and using those public records in your work. And then we'll finish up on August 12th with Jody Beck, who's a community educator for the Freedom Forum, to talk about media ethics. So that's open to everyone. It's geared towards interns, newer reporters, or people who want to just refresh on those skills. Each of you has also now been added to the MDDC list for our Friday Planner, which is our main base of communication. And if you have any questions or need anything, you can always reach out to me or to Tom. We're happy to help you in whatever way we can. So thank you, and I hope you all have a great summer.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much.